Hello, friends. We are interested in the geography of our views, so please like and write in the comments from which city are you watching us, and were there loud stories of betrayal in your city? Perhaps the next story about betrayal will be from your city, and we start. Jake Carter woke up at 6:45 am to the sound of his alarm clock, an old one with peeling paint that he had bought in college for $5 at a crossroads. The sun barely filtered through the thick beige curtains of their bedroom, casting long shadows on the slightly worn wooden floor next to the bed where he put his feet when he got up every morning. He stretched, feeling a slight ache in his back, the result of 8 hours working on drawings in the offices of the engineering firm Harrison and Sons, where he had spent the last 5 years designing bridges and water lines for small Ohio towns. He was 28, but he already felt older, maybe because of the routine, or maybe because life in the Columbus suburbs flowed as calmly as the Hocking River, which flowed 10 miles from their home. Everything was predictable here. Neighbor Paul mowed the lawn every Saturday. The postman, Mrs. Grace, left newspapers on the porch exactly at 7:15, and in the evenings the silence was broken only by the barking of the dog from the next street. Nearby, curled up under the covers, Emily slept. Her light brown hair was scattered across the pillow, a few strands stuck to her cheek, and her thin hand with a simple silver bracelet lay on top of the sheet. Jake looked at her for a few seconds, as he did almost every morning of their 3-year marriage. She was beautiful, not that glossy beauty from magazines, but simple, lively, a slightly freckled face, soft cheekbones, and eyes the color of a summer sky that could light up with laughter in a second. Even now, in her sleep, she looked alive, full of energy, although in recent weeks this energy had been evaporating somewhere. He noticed that she began to sleep more often on her side, facing the wall and not towards him as before, when they fell asleep holding hands. It's a small thing, but it stuck. He stood up, trying not to break the floorboards. The old house, built back in the 70s, made sounds with every step, and walked into the bathroom. The house was small but cozy, one story, with white siding that was peeling in places from the winter winds, and a small porch where in the evenings he and Emily drank lemonade and made plans. They bought it 2 years ago with a 30-year mortgage, and Jake was still proud of it, their first real step into adulthood. The bathroom smelled of her lavender soap, and on the shelf there was a jar of vanilla-scented hand cream. Emily loved little things like that. There was a round mirror in a worn wooden frame hanging above the sink, and he washed his face with cold water, looking at his reflection. Short dark hair, light stubble, tired brown eyes with fine wrinkles at the corners. I need to shave, he thought, but decided that it would do just fine in the office. No one found fault with his appearance, as long as he turned in the drawings on time. Returning to the bedroom, he pulled on jeans and a plaid shirt, the uniform of an Ohio engineer. He joked and went down to the kitchen. She was the heart of the house. Light wooden cabinets, slightly faded floral wallpaper, a table covered with a checkered tablecloth they had bought at the crossroads last year. On the windowsill stood an old radio that Emily's parents had given her, still picking up the local country and weather station. The kitchen smelled of coffee. Emily forgot to turn off the coffee maker yesterday, and now there was a dark, bitter liquid at the bottom. Jake poured it out, brewed it fresh black, without sugar, as he liked, and took out the eggs, butter, and package of bacon from the refrigerator that had been there since last week. He loved to cook breakfast. It was their ritual. On the weekends, they did it together. She frying bacon, he needed pancake batter, and some Johnny Cash tune was blasting from the radio. Emily always sang along, even if she mixed up the words, and laughed when he pretended to conduct a frying pan. But today was Tuesday, and she had to get to work by 8. She worked as an administrator at a small travel company, Global Travel, in downtown Columbus, arranging travel packages and dealing with customer complaints. Jake fried some eggs, threw a couple of strips of bacon into the pan for flavor, cut some white bread on toast, and set the plates on the table. From the cabinet, he took out 2 mugs, his black one with the inscription, Best Engineer, a gift from colleagues for his last birthday, and her white one with a sun drawn on it, which she brought from a trip to Cape Cod 2 years ago. Get up, breakfast is ready, he shouted, spilling the coffee. His voice echoed off the walls, and he heard the blanket rustle in the bedroom. Emily appeared a few minutes later, wrapped in a blue robe that was slightly faded on the sleeves. She pulled her hair into a messy bun, securing it with an elastic band, and her bare feet quietly padded across the linoleum. She smiled a little forcedly, it seemed to Jake, and sat down at the table, pulling her mug toward her. "Thank you, honey," she said, wrapping her hands around the mug. Her voice was soft, but it did not have that usual spark, that warmth that he loved so much. "You're early today." "Yes, we need to finish the drawings by noon. New project for the Lancaster Bridge," he replied, sitting down opposite. "How are you? Did you get enough sleep?" "It's okay," she said, looking into the coffee and slowly stirring with a spoon, although she didn't add any sugar. "I'm just tired. Yesterday I went to bed late, sorting out papers for work." Jake nodded, although something in her tone made him wary. Over the past couple of months, she often looked distant, thoughtful. Previously, Emily could talk for hours about her dreams to go to Italy, see the Colosseum, try real tiramisu in a small trattoria somewhere in Tuscany. She was the one who pulled him out of his comfort zone. 2 years ago, she convinced him to take a vacation and go to Lake Michigan, where they rented a boat and fished, laughing at the way he got tangled in the fishing line, and she pretended to know how to untangle it. But now she was silent more often than she spoke, and her smile began to reach her eyes less often. He chalked it up to fatigue. Working at a travel agency was not easy. The clients were capricious, and the management was pressing deadlines. Or maybe it was he himself who became bored. The thought stung, but he pushed it away by taking a bite of toast. "Maybe we can go somewhere this weekend," he suggested, swallowing his food. "To the park or to the lake. The weather promises to be good. Yesterday they said on the radio that it would be warm, almost like summer." "We'll see," she answered, without looking up from her plate. She broke off a piece of toast, but didn't eat it, just turned it over in her hands. "I may have things to do." "What's going on?" he asked with a slight smile, trying to lighten the atmosphere. "Do you save the world from bad trips? Or are you on a secret mission in the office?" She grinned, but somehow forcedly, without the lightness that she had before. "Something like that," she said, and stood up, tightening the belt of her robe. "I'll go get ready, otherwise I'll be late. Thanks for the breakfast." Jake watched her go into the bedroom, leaving the plate almost untouched. Her footsteps faded outside the door, and he felt a slight pang of anxiety. Nothing specific, just a feeling that a thin but tangible wall had grown between them. He finished his coffee, put the dishes in the sink, and went to get ready for work. The day promised to be normal. A drive to the office in an old '98 Ford, drawings, a couple of jokes with colleagues over lunch at the diner across the street. But somewhere in the depths of his soul, he understood that this ordinary life, which he valued so much, began to come apart at the seams. Only he did not yet know how strongly and how soon it would manifest itself. He went out onto the porch to pick up the newspaper that Mrs. Grace had already left at the door. The morning air smelled of freshly cut grass. Paul, the neighbor, was clearly up before everyone else. Jake took a deep breath, trying to push away the anxiety. "It's okay," he told himself. "I'm just tired. She's too." But when he returned to the house and heard Emily quietly humming something unfamiliar in the bedroom, a melody he had never heard before, his anxiety only intensified. Jake Carter never considered himself a suspicious person. He grew up in a family where trust was the basis. His father, a mechanic at a local auto repair shop, always said that doubt is rust to the soul, and his mother, a school teacher, taught him to see the good in people. But in recent weeks, something in his measured life began to shift, as if someone was quietly tightening the screws in a mechanism that he considered reliable. It didn't start with some big event, but with little things that individually could be attributed to an accident, but together they added up to an alarming picture. All morning after breakfast, when Emily left to get ready, Jake tried to concentrate on his business. He packed his briefcase, a worn leather bag inherited from his grandfather, and put in it plans for a Lancaster bridge, pencils, a ruler, and a couple of sandwiches wrapped in foil. It was cool but sunny outside, and he decided to warm up the car while he brushed his teeth. His '98 Ford dark green, with a dent on the right fender from a bad parking situation 3 years ago, started up on the third try, releasing a cloud of bluish smoke. Jake looked at him through the kitchen window while he rinsed his mouth and thought that he should stop by Bill's workshop to check the carburetor. But his thoughts quickly returned to Emily. She came out of the bedroom wearing a gray coat and carrying the black leather bag with a worn strap that he had given her for their anniversary last year. She was wearing jeans and a light blouse, nothing out of the ordinary, but Jake noticed she was wearing lipstick, a light pink gloss that wasn't on at breakfast. This surprised him. She usually wore makeup only for special occasions, like dinner at a restaurant or meeting with friends. He opened his mouth to ask, but she beat him to it with a peck on the cheek. See you in the evening," she said quickly, pulling on her shoes at the door. Her voice was slightly higher than usual, as if she was in a hurry to leave. "Are you late today?" he asked, trying to sound casual, although something heavy was moving in his chest. "Maybe," she answered, not looking at him, fumbling with the lock of her bag. "Depends on the clients. We have a couple of complex armors. We need to figure it out." "Okay," he nodded, although the words were stuck in his throat. "Call me if anything happens." She waved her hand and slipped out the door, leaving behind a light trail of vanilla hand cream. Jake watched her get into her silver Honda Civic and drive away down the street, past the neatly manicured lawns and identical houses of their suburb. He stood there for another minute, holding the briefcase in his hands, and went to his car. The day started as usual, but the feeling of wrongness did not go away. The Harrison and Sons office was quiet except for the hum of the old air conditioners and the rustling of papers on the desks. Jake sat at his desk, a corner desk by the window, littered with drawings and coffee cups from the vending machine in the hallway. Opposite him sat Tom, a colleague of about 40, bald and noisy, who was always telling stories about fishing. Today he was busy with another story about how he caught a bass the size of a dog, but Jake was only half listening. His thoughts revolved around Emily. She began to stay late at work, more often first once a week, then twice, and now almost every day. She used to call if she stayed after 6, telling her how a client got the dates mixed up or how Marge's boss gave him a dressing down for small change. But now there were no calls. She simply came home at 8 or even 9, took off her coat, threw her bag on the sofa and said, "I'm tired, I'll go take a shower." Jake didn't think much of it was work, but in recent days her excuses had sounded more and more mechanical. He remembered last night. They were sitting in the living room, watching an old episode of The Simpsons on TV, leafing through a travel magazine she'd taken from work. Her phone was lying on the table, an old Nokia with a worn keyboard, and suddenly it vibrated. Emily quickly grabbed it, throwing the magazine, and went into the kitchen, closing the door. Jake could hear her muffled voice, short phrases like, "Yep, okay," and "not now." When she returned, he asked who called. "Colleague," she answered, shrugging her shoulders. "For work." At 10 o'clock in the evening, he clarified, raising an eyebrow. "Yes, we have an urgent order," she said, averting her eyes, and immediately changed the subject. "Did you take out the trash? Pick up tomorrow." He nodded, although something sank inside. Colleague at 10 in the evening? He knew her co-workers Linda, the fat girl with a loud laugh, and Steve, the guy with the beard who was always complaining about his car. Neither of them would call this late, but Jake pushed the thought away. "Don't be paranoid," he told himself, returning to the drawings. The day passed slowly. By lunchtime, he had finished a sketch of the bridge support and went with Tom to a diner across the street, Joe's, which served greasy burgers and throat-sore coffee. Tom chatted about his daughter getting ready for graduation, and Jake nodded, but had other things on his mind. When they returned, he decided to call Emily just to check how she was doing. I dialed the office number, and Linda answered. "Hi, Jake," she said in her nasal voice. "Emily is not here. She left with a client for a meeting." "To a meeting?" he asked, frowning. "Where?" "To Dayton, I think," Linda answered. "With a group of tourists, they choose a hotel there. He'll probably be back in the evening." Oh, I see, he said, trying to hide his surprise. Thank you, Linda. He hung up and stared at the phone. Dayton. It's an hour's drive from Columbus. Emily had never traveled that far for work. She usually sat in the office or met with clients in the city. He tried to remember if she had mentioned anything about Dayton, but his mind went blank. Maybe she forgot to say, or didn't you want to? He shook his head, clearing his thoughts, and went back to work, but the pencil in his hand was shaking. He arrived home at 6. Emily wasn't there yet, which wasn't surprising. If she was in Dayton, she'd be back later. He threw his briefcase at the door, turned on the TV. Some old Western with Clint Eastwood was playing, but looked at the screen, not getting into it. At 7:30, the garage door slammed and Emily walked in. She was wearing the same gray coat, but her hair was down and her blouse was slightly wrinkled. She threw her bag on the sofa and rubbed her temples. "Hello," she said without looking at him. It was a hell of a day. "Yes?" he asked, turning off the TV. "What's happened?" "Clients," she sighed, taking off her coat. "Everything is as usual. I'm taking a shower." She went into the bathroom, and Jake remained sitting, looking at her bag. She was lying on her side, and a corner of paper was sticking out of her side pocket. He had no intention of rummaging through her things. It wasn't his style, but curiosity overpowered him. He stood up, walked over to the sofa, and carefully pulled out a piece of paper. It was a check from the Bean and Brew Cafe in Dayton. Latte and croissant, time 3:42 p.m., amount $8.75. He froze, holding the check in his hands. Emily didn't mention the cafe. She talked about the hotel and tourists, but not about going somewhere else. And why was the check in the bag and not thrown away? He heard the water turn on in the bathroom and quickly put the check back, feeling his heart beat faster. It didn't mean anything, he told himself. She might stop by for coffee after a meeting, a common occurrence. But for some reason he couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something. He returned to the couch, turned on the TV, and pretended to watch when Emily came out 15 minutes later, wrapped in a towel. "Are you okay?" she asked, noticing his intense gaze. "Yes, just tired," he answered, forcing himself to smile. "How was your meeting?" "Okay," she said, shrugging. "Tourists, as always, do not know what they want. Okay, I'm off to bed. I'll have to get up early tomorrow." She went into the bedroom, and Jake remained sitting, looking at the bag. Questions were swirling in my head. Why didn't she tell me about the cafe? Why were you in such a hurry to leave in the morning? And what kind of call was it yesterday? He didn't want to suspect her Emily, his Emily, with her laughter and dreams of travel, but the crack in their lives was growing wider. He turned off the TV and went to take out the trash as she asked. But in the darkness of the yard, under the stars, his thoughts were far from routine. Something was wrong, and he was afraid to find out what it was. Jake Carter didn't plan to become the man who spies on his wife. It went against everything he believed in: trust, honesty, the simplicity of their life in suburban Columbus. But after he found a receipt from a cafe in Dayton, doubts gnawed at him like rust in old metal. He tried to brush it off, telling himself that it was nonsense, that Emily was just tired, that he was inventing problems where there were none. But her detachment, evasive answers, and that call at 10 in the evening did not give him peace. By the next morning, he made a decision that disgusted himself. He would go after her. The morning started as usual. Emily was up before he could make breakfast and was already in the kitchen, pouring coffee into mugs. She was wearing a dark blue skirt and white blouse, her hair tied in a neat ponytail. She looked put together, but there was a nervousness in her movements. Jake walked in, putting on a smile, and tried to start a conversation. "You're beautiful today," he said, sitting down at the table. "Anything special at work?" She froze for a second, holding the mug in her hands, then smiled too quickly, too tightly. "No, it's just going to be a long day," she answered, looking away. "Meetings, paperwork, the usual thing." "Back to Dayton?" he asked, trying to sound casual, although his heart was pounding faster. "No, I'm in the office all day," she said, putting the mug on the table. "Why do you ask?" Just like that, he shrugged, but everything inside sank. She lied or not? He didn't know, but decided to check. Emily left at 7:40, throwing a "see you tonight" over her shoulder as her Honda disappeared around the corner. Jake waited 10 minutes, feeling his palms sweat, then took the keys to the Ford and drove towards her office. Global Travel was located in downtown Columbus, in a low brick building with a sun-faded sign. He parked across the road in the shade of an old oak tree where he could see the entrance and turned off the engine. His throat was dry, and he regretted not taking water. An hour has passed. Emily didn't show up. At 9:15, Linda came out of the office carrying a box of donuts, but Emily was missing. Jake called the office from his cell phone, an old Motorola that crackled every time it rang. "Global Travel," Linda answered, chewing something. "Hi, Linda. This is Jake. Is Emily there?" he asked, trying not to show the trembling in his voice. "Oh, hi, Jake," she said. "No, she left half an hour ago. She said she was going to a meeting with a client. He'll probably be back after lunch." "I see," he managed. "Thank you." He threw the phone on the seat and gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. She left again. Where? With whom? He started the car and drove along the street where it usually took its route to the center, but then he remembered Dayton. The receipt from Bean and Brew popped into his mind, and he turned around at the next light, heading toward I-70. It was madness, he understood, but he couldn't stop. The drive to Dayton took 50 minutes. He was driving, clutching the steering wheel, with the radio tuned to the local oldies rock station, Sweet Home Alabama, blaring in the car, but he could barely hear it. Scraps were spinning in my head, her smile in the morning, the shine on her lips, the words, "in the office all day." When he drove into Dayton, the sun was already high and the streets were full of cars. He parked at Bean and Brew, a small cafe with a wooden sign and floor-to-ceiling windows, and turned off the engine. It was crowded inside. Students with laptops, a couple of old men at a table by the window, a waitress with a tired face. But Emily was not there. He was about to leave when he saw her Honda in the parking lot across the street, by a small park with a fountain. His heart jumped, and he got out of the car, keeping in the shade of the trees. And then he saw her. Emily stood by the bench, wearing the same blue suit, but with her hair down, and there was a man next to her. Tall, wearing jeans and a gray shirt, with short blonde hair. They laughed. She leaned towards him. He put his arm around her waist, and they walked towards the fountain, holding hands. Jake recognized him as Chris, Emily's colleague. He saw him a couple of times at a corporate party. Noisy, with a wide smile, who liked to tell jokes. Now this smile was for her. Jake stood as if his feet were rooted to the ground. There was a burning sensation in my chest and a lump in my throat. He watched as they sat down on the bench, as she laid her head on his shoulder, as he whispered something in her ear, and she laughed as she had not laughed with him for a long time. This was not a friendly conversation, not a chance meeting. This was something more, and he knew it. He turned around, walked towards the car, sat down and hit the steering wheel with his fist so that the signal squealed briefly. People on the street looked around, but he didn't care. He started the engine and drove home, not feeling the road. By 6 in the evening, he was home. Emily hasn't returned yet. He sat in the living room, in the dark, with the TV turned off, looking at her bag that had been left by the sofa in the morning. My hands were shaking, my head was buzzing. He didn't know what to do, scream, leave, remain silent. But he waited. At 7:45, the garage door slammed and Emily walked in. She turned on the light, threw her coat on the chair and froze when she saw him. "Jesus, Jake, you scared me," she said, pressing her hand to her chest. "Why are you sitting in the dark?" "Where have you been?" he asked quietly, looking into her eyes. His voice trembled, but he held on. "At work," she answered, looking away. "I told you, it's a long day." "In Dayton," he clarified, standing up. His tone became sharper. She froze, then shrugged. "No, in the office. Where did you get the idea?" she said, but her voice betrayed her. It became higher, as always when she was nervous. "I saw you, Emily," he said, stepping closer. "In the park, with Chris. You were with him." Her face turned pale. She opened her mouth, but didn't say anything. just pursed her lips. Jake felt the rage that had been building all day rushing out. "Don't lie to me," he shouted, hitting the back of the sofa with his fist. "I saw how you laughed, how he hugged you. What was that, Emily? What the hell is going on?" She stepped back, but then straightened up, and a mixture of fear and defiance flashed in her eyes. "Okay," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "Yes, I was with Chris. And what? And what?" He almost started screaming. "You are my wife, Emily. 3 years. We built this life together, and you. Are you with him? How long does it take?" She was silent, looking at the floor, then raised her eyes. "3 months," she said quietly. "It started 3 months ago." Jake felt the ground disappear from under his feet. He grabbed the sofa to steady himself and stared at her. "3 months?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "You slept with him behind my back for 3 months? Did you meet and laugh while I was here? While I was waiting for you at home?" "I didn't sleep with him," she said quickly, but he interrupted. "Don't lie. I saw you. This is not friendship, Emily. This is betrayal." He choked, feeling tears burning his eyes. "Why? Why didn't I please you?" She clenched her fists, her face turning red. "Because you just live, Jake," she suddenly shouted. "You work, eat, sleep, and that's it. And I want more. I'm suffocating here, in this house, in this routine. Chris, he's different. He lives, he makes me happy." Her words hit like a knife. Jake looked at her, not believing that this was his Emily speaking, the one who dreamed of children, of trips, of a future with him. "Happy?" he squeezed out. "What am I, nobody? Is 3 years nothing to you?" "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, her voice breaking. "I tried to stop, but I don't know, Jake. I'm confused." "I'm confused," he repeated, smiling bitterly. "You cheated on me for 3 months and got confused. Get out." "What?" She blinked, taking a step towards him. "Get out of my house," he said, pointing to the door. "I don't want to see you. Go to your Chris, since he is so alive." "Jake, wait," she began, but he turned his back. "Go away," he repeated quietly, and there was such pain in his voice that she fell silent. Emily stood there for another minute, then took her bag and left. The door slammed and silence covered the house. Jake fell on the sofa, covering his face with his hands, and for the first time in many years he cried not from grief, but from rage and powerlessness. The truth was in front of him, and it tore apart everything he loved. The silence in the house after Emily left was deafening. Jake sat on the couch, still holding his head in his hands, feeling the tears drying on his cheeks, leaving sticky trails. The lights in the living room were off, only the faint glow of a street lamp filtering through the curtains, streaking the carpet. He heard Emily's car start up in the garage and the sound of the engine fade into the distance, carrying her away. He didn't know where, and he didn't want to know. Everything was boiling inside. Rage, pain, humiliation, everything mixed into one hot lump that stuck in my chest and did not allow me to breathe. He stood up, staggering, and walked into the kitchen. There was still the smell of her vanilla hand cream, and on the table there was a mug with half-drunk coffee, hers, white, with a sun drawn on it. Jake looked at her, and their trip to Cape Cod flashed before his eyes. Emily, barefoot, running through the sand with this mug in her hands, laughing, screaming that she had found the perfect souvenir. Then he thought that they were forever she and their little dreams. Now this mug seemed like a mockery. He grabbed it and threw it into the sink. A loud crack of porcelain broke the silence, and shards scattered across the tabletop. He froze, looking at them, and felt something inside break along with her. The night dragged on slowly. Jake didn't sleep, he couldn't. He walked around the house like a ghost, touching things that just yesterday were common to them. Her travel books on the shelf, the blanket with which she covered herself in the evenings, a framed photograph from their wedding on the fireplace. In the photo, they were smiling, he in a black suit, she in a simple white dress, with daisies in her hair. 3 years ago. 3 years, which she now crossed out with 3 months with Chris. He clenched his fists, feeling his nails dig into his palms, and turned away from the photo. By morning, he decided he wouldn't let it go so easily. Yes, he kicked her out yesterday, but it was an outburst of anger. Now that the adrenaline has worn off, all that is left is emptiness and questions. Why? How could she? So what next? He didn't want a divorce, not right away, not like this. This was their home, their life, and he wasn't going to give it up to some Chris without a fight. But he couldn't even see her, knowing the truth. It was necessary to talk, to understand what she wanted. He dialed her number, but the phone was turned off. So he called Linda's office, hoping Emily was there. "No, Jake, she's not here today," Linda answered, chewing her gum. "She asked to take a couple of days off. She said it was a family matter." "Family," he repeated dully. "Thank you." He hung up and sat on the kitchen chair, looking at the broken pieces of his mug. Family matters. It was a lie. He was her family, and she ran away. Where? To Chris? The thought made him nauseous. He stood up, poured water from the tap, and drank it in one gulp, feeling the cold burn his throat. We had to wait for her and talk. She must come back at least for things. Emily showed up around noon. Jake heard the garage door slam and walked out into the living room. She stood at the entrance, wearing jeans and a gray sweater, with the same black bag over her shoulder. Her face was pale, there were dark circles under her eyes, she clearly hadn't slept. Seeing him, she stopped, pursing her lips. "I'm getting my things," she said quietly, without looking into the eyes. "Where have you been?" he asked, crossing his arms. The voice was hoarse, but calm. He controlled himself. "A friend's," she answered, walking past him towards the bedroom. I needed to think. "A friend's," he repeated, following her. "Isn't it Chris's?" She froze at the bedroom door, but did not turn around. "No, not Chris," she said, anger flashing in her tone. "That's enough, Jake. I don't want to discuss this again." "And I want to," he said, stepping closer. "You can't just leave after what you said yesterday." 3 months, Emily. You cheated on me for 3 months, and now you pretend that nothing happened. She turned, her eyes sparkling. "I'm not pretending," she said sharply. "I know what I did, and I feel bad about it, okay? But I can't pretend that everything is the same. I'm not happy here." "Not happy," he repeated, feeling the rage rising again. "And I was happy. I thought we were building something together. Children, home, future, don't they mean anything?" "So," she said, her voice trembling. "But I can't do this anymore. I'm tight, Jake. You're good, but you're like this house. Everything is always in place, everything is predictable, and I want freedom." "Freedom," he smiled bitterly. "And Chris gives it to you, right? What did he promise you? Trips? Adventures? Or just a warmer bed?" "Stop it," she clenched her fists. "This is not about him. This is about me. I'm confused, I don't know what I want, but I can't stay here and pretend that everything is fine." Jake looked at her, and two feelings fought in his chest. The desire to grab her, shake her, make her understand that she was destroying, and the desire to push her away, drive her away forever. He took a deep breath, trying to calm down. "Then what do you want?" he asked finally. "Divorce? Go to him? What?" She was silent, looking at the floor, then raised her eyes. "I don't want a divorce," she said quietly. "Not yet. I need stability, Jake. This house, our life, I'm not ready to give up everything, but I need time." "Stability?" He almost laughed, but the laughter got stuck in his throat. "You cheated on me for 3 months, and now you want stability? Are you serious?" "Yes," she said, and there was a strange mixture of shame and stubbornness in her voice. "I'm not proud of it, but I don't want to be left with nothing. I need to figure myself out." "Sort it out," he repeated, feeling how cold everything inside was. "Should I sit and wait until you decide whether you need me or not?" "I'm not asking you to wait," she said. "Do what you want, but I can't stay here now." "Then go away," he said, his voice becoming firm. "Leave right now. I won't be your safety net, Emily. Either you are with me or you are not." She looked at him, and pain flashed in her eyes, but was immediately replaced by determination. "Okay," she said, "I'll go to Liz. To Cleveland. For a couple of weeks, I need to think." "To Liz," he repeated, remembering her sister. Liz was 5 years older than Emily and lived in Cleveland with her husband and 2 children in a large house near Lake Erie. She and Jake never got along. Liz considered him boring, a man without ambition. And what will you think there? The day after Emily left began with a silence that seemed almost tangible to Jake Carter. He woke up on the sofa in the living room, where he fell asleep at night, not finding the strength to go up to the bedroom. The clothes, jeans, and yesterday's checked shirt were wrinkled, saturated with the smell of sweat and stale air. He lay looking at the ceiling, where a thin crack, which he kept meaning to repair, snaked from the corner to the chandelier. The light outside the window was gray and heavy clouds hung over the suburbs of Columbus, promising rain. The clock on the wall was ticking, an old one with a pendulum, a housewarming gift from his mother, and each tick echoed in his head like a reminder of emptiness. He didn't sleep much. The night passed in some kind of semi-delirium. He either fell into short dreams, where he saw Emily, her laughter, her hands, her face, then he woke up abruptly, feeling his heart pounding with anger and pain. Her words, "I'm cramped, I want freedom," were spinning in my head like a broken record. He tried to understand where he had gone wrong, at what point their life, their home, their plans had become a cage for her. But there were no answers, only dull melancholy and the feeling that he had lost something more than just his wife. Jake stood up, feeling his muscles ache from the uncomfortable position, and walked into the kitchen. There were still fragments of her mug white with the sun, which he broke yesterday in a fit of rage. He looked at them, and his mind flashed back to that trip to Cape Cod. Emily, barefoot on the beach, her hair wet, holding a mug and laughing, saying it was their lucky charm. Now that talisman was in the trash, just like their marriage. He took a broom, swept up the fragments into a dustpan, and poured them into a bucket, trying not to think about how symbolic it looked. Then he made coffee black, without sugar, as always, but did not drink it. The liquid remained in his best engineer mug, cold and untouched, as he sat at his desk, looking out the window. Nothing has changed outside. Neighbor Paul was mowing his lawn, despite the cloudy weather, his old tractor rattling along as it always did on Saturdays. The postwoman, Mrs. Grace, walked by, leaving a newspaper on the porch. Jake saw her silhouette through the glass of the front door. Everything was the same as yesterday, as a week ago, as 3 years ago, when she and Emily had just moved into this house. But now this everything was empty, devoid of her presence. He remembered how she loved to sit on the porch with a book, how she made fun of Paul, calling him the king of the lawns, how Mrs. Grace waved, shouting something about the weather. Now the porch was empty, the book lay on the shelf in the living room, and her voice had died down somewhere in Cleveland with her sister Liz. Jake didn't know what to do. He thought about calling her, but the phone remained turned off. He checked in the morning, dialing the number from the kitchen device, an old one with a twisted cord. There were no beeps, only the answering machine dryly reported that the subscriber is unavailable. He could have called Liz, but he didn't want to. Liz never loved him. She considered him boring, a man without a spark, as she once said at a family dinner, thinking that he did not hear. Emily had laughed in defense of him then, but now he wondered if she had thought the same. Maybe Liz was right, and he really was too predictable, too easy for her. He got up, walked into the bedroom, and froze at the closet. Her shelves were half empty. She had only taken some of her things, leaving behind an old sweater, a couple of t-shirts, and the dress she had worn on their first anniversary. He took the sweater, gray, soft, with the smell of her shampoo, and squeezed it in his hands, feeling the tears welling up again, but he did not let them spill. Instead, he threw the sweater back and closed the closet door, as if he could close his feelings behind it. Then he lay down on the bed, their bed, with the blue blanket she had chosen, and stared at the ceiling. Sleep did not come, but he lay there, hoping that fatigue would take its toll. The day passed slowly. Jake didn't go to work. He called the office, told Tom that he was sick, and Tom, as always, joked about the engineer's flu. He stayed at home, wandering from room to room, touching things that reminded him of her. Her travel magazines, her hand cream on the bathroom shelf, her shoes by the door black, with scuffed toes. He turned on the TV, but the sound of an old Clint Eastwood Western was annoying, so he turned it off. Then he went out onto the porch, picked up the newspaper, but did not read it. The headlines about local elections and new construction seemed distant, alien. He just sat there, looking outside until the clouds began to thicken and the first drops of rain began to patter on the roof. In the evening, he decided to eat. He took out the leftover pizza he ordered last week from the refrigerator and heated it in the microwave. He ate mechanically, sitting at the kitchen table, where just yesterday they had breakfast together. The taste was bland, but he forced himself to swallow it to give himself something to do. The rain intensified, pattering on the windows, and the house was filled with damp, heavy air. Jake looked at his watch, 7:15 p.m. It's been exactly a day since she left. He thought that he would call and demand an explanation, but now he realized that he did not want her voice. Not now. He was just waiting, he didn't know what. The phone rang at 8:03. Jake winced, spilling coffee on the table. He had just brewed a new batch, hoping that the caffeine would drive away the drowsiness. The sound was sharp, piercing, and he went to the device, wiping his hands on his jeans. The number on the screen was unfamiliar code 216 Cleveland. My heart pounded. Liz? Emily? He picked up the phone, feeling his palms sweat. "Hello," he said hoarsely. "Mr. Carter?" The voice was male, low, official. "This is Officer David Martin, Ohio State Police, Cleveland Station." Jake froze, feeling a chill run down his spine. "Yes, it's me," he answered, clutching the phone. "What's the matter?" "Sir, I'm calling about your wife, Emily Carter," the officer said, and there was something heavy in his tone that made Jake tense. "She was in an accident on I-71 this morning. I need you to confirm some information." "Accident?" Jake asked, his voice trembling. "What? What's wrong with her? Is she alive?" The pause on the other end was too long. Jake heard the rustling of papers, the distant noise of voices, and each sound seemed like an eternity to him. "Sir, I'm very sorry," Martin said finally. "There was a collision with a truck. The car caught fire. We found a burned body, and it was identified as Emily Carter, according to the wedding ring and the rest of the driver's license." Jake felt the floor disappear from under his feet. He grabbed the table so as not to fall. The pipe almost slipped out of his hand. "What?" he squeezed out. "No, this cannot be. She was going to her sister. Are you sure?" "We understand that this is a shock," the officer said, and softness appeared in his voice. "But the ring and the documents belong to her. The accident occurred around 10 m, 10 miles from Cleveland. The truck lost control on the wet road and crashed into her car. The fire was bad, sir. We need you to come for confirmation." "Confirmation," Jake repeated, feeling the words get stuck in his throat. "You said the body was burned. How do I recognize her?" "We identified her from her belongings," Martin answered. "But we need your presence. This is a formality. Can you come to the place? Or the Cleveland morgue, if that's more convenient for you?" Jake didn't answer right away. He stood looking at the phone, at the drops of coffee that flowed down the edge of the table, at the rain outside the window. Emily, dead. It didn't fit in my head. Yesterday she stood here, in this house, talking about freedom, about Cleveland, and now, a fire, body. He remembered her face freckles, blue eyes, smile, and imagined the fire consuming it all. His stomach clenched, and he could barely hold back the urge to vomit. "I'll come," he finally said. The voice was alien, empty, in place. "Where is it?" "I-71, a mile past exit 237, Martin answered. "We're still there. The area is blocked off. Get out if you can. And please accept my condolences, sir." Jake hung up without saying another word. He stood looking at the device until it began to hum in silence. Then he slowly sank into a chair, feeling the world around him falling apart. Emily, dead. It was impossible, but the officer's voice sounded too real. He got up, took the keys to the Ford, put on his jacket, an old leather one that was hanging by the door, and went out into the rain. "I had to go. Make sure." The drive to I-71 took an hour. The rain poured incessantly, the Ford windshield wipers squeaked, smearing water on the glass. Jake drove in silence. The radio was turned off. Only the noise of tires on wet asphalt and the sound of drops filled the cabin. He didn't think he couldn't. My thoughts were confused. Her departure, her words, her betrayal, and now the accident. He remembered their last fight, her "I need space," her suitcase by the door. If he hadn't kicked her out, if she had stayed, this wouldn't have happened. Guilt mixed with grief, but he drove it away, squeezing the steering wheel until his fingers hurt. When he arrived at the place, the highway was blocked. The flashing lights of police cars and ambulances hurt the eyes. Orange cones stood along the road, directing cars to detour. Jake parked on the side of the road, 100 yards from the barrier, and walked out into the rain. Water ran down his face, soaking his jacket, but he didn't notice. He walked forward until he saw her car, or what was left of it. The Honda Civic was crumpled, black with soot, with a burnt-out interior. The front end was crushed into a truck, a huge one, with the logo of some transport company that stood nearby, tilted to one side. The smell of burning rubber and gasoline hung in the air, mixing with the dampness of the rain. The firefighters had already left, but traces of foam were white on the asphalt. Jake looked at this, feeling his legs give way. It was her car. He recognized the "I travel" sticker on the rear window, miraculously surviving, although melted. "Mr. Carter." A voice behind him made him turn around. A tall man in uniform, with short gray hair and a tired face, approached him holding an umbrella. "Officer Martin." We spoke on the phone. Jake nodded, at a loss for words. Martin gestured towards the car. "This is her car," he said. "The number matches. The accident happened in the morning. The truck skidded around a bend and the driver lost control. The impact was strong and the fire started almost immediately. We found the ring and the remains of the license in the salon. Here." He held out a plastic bag. Inside was the engagement ring, gold, with a small engraved design that he had placed on her finger 3 years ago. The metal was blackened but recognizable. Nearby is a piece of plastic that was once her license, with the barely legible name, Emily Carter. Jake took the bag with trembling hands, looking at the ring, and felt the tears mix with the rain on his face. "Where is she?" he asked hoarsely. "I want to see her." Martin shook his head. "Sir, the body has already been taken to the morgue," he said softly. "It is in bad condition. The fire was severe. We can't let you in there right now. You'd better go to Cleveland, to the station or morgue for formalities." "I want to see her," Jake repeated, his voice breaking. "This is my wife. I have to." "I understand," Martin interrupted, placing his hand on his shoulder. "But believe me, you shouldn't. We're sure it's her. Ring, documents, car, everything fits together. You need time to." "Time?" Jake stepped back sharply, throwing off his hand. "My wife burned in this car, and you're talking about time." Martin sighed, looking down. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "Go home, Mr. Carter. We will contact you tomorrow. You need to rest." Jake didn't answer. He turned to the car, looking at the charred frame, and felt something inside break. He wanted to scream, run there, pull her out, but there was nothing there, only metal and ash. He stood in the rain until Martin left, until the car lights began to fade into the darkness. Then he slowly walked to the Ford, sat behind the wheel, and cried quietly, silently, squeezing the ring in the bag so that the plastic cracked. The road home was like a fog. He didn't remember how he got there, how he parked, or how he entered the house. He fell onto the sofa, still in his wet jacket, and stared into space. Emily was dead. It was real, but I couldn't wrap my head around it. Yesterday she left, but today she is gone. He closed his eyes, feeling the shock give way to a dull, heavy pain, and lay there until night fell over the house. Jake Carter didn't remember the days after the police call. Everything was mixed up in a gray fog. A trip to the Cleveland morgue, where he signed some papers without looking at the body. He was told that it was not worth looking, and he believed. Conversations with Officer Martin, who dryly outlined the details of the accident. Calls to relatives, whose voices sounded like an echo in the void. He returned home with her engagement ring in his pocket, blackened, in a plastic bag and placed it on the kitchen table, where it lay like a silent reproach. The house became alien. Everything, her books, her shoes by the door, her hand cream reminded of her, but now they were fragments of the past, not their lives. The funeral was scheduled 4 days after the accident on Friday, October 14th of the year. Jake chose Green Lawn Cemetery in Columbus, a small cemetery with neat rows of headstones and old oak trees lining the paths. It was the place where his grandfather had been buried, and he thought Emily would have approved. She loved the trees, their shade, their tranquility. He didn't ask Liz, Emily's sister. She already took over half of the organization, called every day, dictated what needed to be done, who to call. Jake agreed mechanically, without arguing. He had no strength. The morning of the funeral began with rain, fine, cold, pounding on the roof and flowing down the windows in thin streams. Jake got up at 6:30. Although the alarm didn't ring, he didn't sleep at all, just lay on the couch, staring into the darkness. He went into the bathroom, washed his face with ice-cold water, looking in the mirror at his face. The stubble had grown into an unkempt beard, his eyes were red, and there were dark circles under them. He was 28, but he looked 40. He shaved slowly, reluctantly, feeling the blade scratch his skin, and put on the black suit he wore to their wedding. His jacket hung on his shoulders, his trousers smell of mothballs, but he didn't bother looking for another one. It didn't matter. The kitchen greeted him with silence. He made coffee, but did not drink it. The smell made him nauseous. On the table lay her ring and the receipt from Bean and Brew that he never threw away. He took the ring, turned it over in his hands, feeling how the metal cooled his fingers, and remembered how he put it on her finger, her smile, her warm hand. Now that hand was ash. He put the ring in his jacket pocket and left the house without looking back. He drove to the cemetery in a Ford, old and creaky, with wipers that could barely cope with the rain. The road was empty, only rare cars flashed in the gray haze. He turned on the radio, but the voice of the presenter cheerfully talking about the weather was annoying, so he turned it off. Silence was better. He thought about what he would say at the funeral, but there were no words, only emptiness, echoing and heavy, like rain behind glass. People have already gathered at the cemetery. Jake parked at the entrance, where there were cars, black, gray, all equally dull. He came out, straightening his tie, and walked towards the crowd that had gathered at the grave. There were a few of them. Emily's parents, John and Marge, who came from Cincinnati, her Aunt Carol, a couple of colleagues from Global Travel, Linda and Steve, and several friends from college. Liz stood in front, tall, with dark hair pulled back into a tight bun, wearing a black dress and coat. Next to her, her husband, Brian, held an umbrella, and their children, a boy of about 8 and a girl of about 5, huddled close to him, hiding from the rain. The coffin was closed, simple, wooden, with brass handles. Jake insisted that it not be opened. He didn't want to see what was left of Emily. He already dreamed of the fire every night. Fire, smoke, her scream, which he did not hear, but felt. The priest, an elderly man with gray temples and a tired voice, had already begun to speak when Jake approached. The words about the way of the Lord and eternal rest sounded empty, like the sound of the wind in the branches of oak trees. Jake stood to the side, looking at the coffin, and heard almost nothing, only the rain knocking on the umbrellas, and his breathing heavy and ragged. When the priest finished, Liz stepped forward, placing a white rose on the coffin lid. Her movements were sharp, almost angry. She turned to Jake, and their eyes met. Her eyes were red, but dry. She did not cry. She only pressed her lips into a thin line. She approached him, and the crowd parted, as if anticipating a storm. "It's your fault," she said quietly, but every word was like a blow. "You kicked her out, Jake. If it weren't for you, she would be alive." Jake froze, feeling the words pierce him. He opened his mouth to answer, but his throat tightened. "I didn't kick her out," he finally squeezed out. "She left on her own. She wanted to leave. Because you didn't give her a choice." Liz raised her voice, and people around began to look at each other. "You knew she was unhappy, but you didn't care. You pressed her into this boring life of yours, and when she asked for freedom, you threw her out onto the road." "That's not true," he said, his voice trembling. "She cheated on me, Liz. 3 months. I couldn't hold her." "Did you cheat?" Liz smiled bitterly. "Have you ever asked why? Have you ever thought that she needed more than this house and your drawings? She called me before she left. She was crying, Jake. She said that you kicked her out, that she had nowhere to go but me." Jake felt the ground shake under his feet. He remembered their last quarrel, her "I need space," his "go away." He didn't think that she would take it so literally that she would go right away. He wanted her to stay so they could talk, but she left. And now Liz stood in front of him, accusing him of something he himself was afraid to admit. "I didn't want this," he said quietly, looking into her eyes. "I loved her." "Did you love it?" Liz stepped closer. Her voice became poisonous. "You loved your routine, Jake. And you lost her long before the accident. It was you who sent her to that track, live with it." She turned away, throwing the rose on the ground, and walked towards Brian, who looked at Jake with silent condemnation. The crowd began to whisper. Emily's parents approached the coffin, laying flowers, but did not look at it. Linda and Steve looked at each other, as if not knowing what to say, and stepped aside. Jake was left alone, standing by the grave, feeling the rain soaking his suit, and Liz's words burning stronger than the fire that took Emily. The earth slowly covered the coffin. The workers with shovels did their job without looking at him, and he watched the clouds fall with a dull thud. He didn't cry, there were no tears left, only emptiness, cold and heavy, like wet asphalt under his feet. When it was all over, people began to disperse, casting quick glances at him, some with pity, some with reproach. Jake returned home in the evening. The rain stopped, leaving puddles on the road and dampness in the air. He entered the house, threw his wet jacket on a chair, and sat down on the sofa without turning on the light. The ring was in his pocket, and he took it out, looking at the blackened metal. He wanted to throw it, to break it, but he couldn't. It was all that was left of her. He put it on the table and closed his eyes, feeling the silence pressing on his temples. The following days passed in a daze. Jake didn't leave the house, didn't answer calls. He only spoke to Tom from the office once, saying that he wouldn't be coming back. Harrison and Sons offered him a vacation, but he refused. He didn't want to see people, their questions, their sympathy. He wrote a letter of resignation, but Tom persuaded him to switch to remote work. "You're a good engineer, Jake. Don't give up everything." He agreed, not because he wanted to, but because it was easier than arguing. They sent him a laptop and blueprints, and he began working from home silently, mechanically, sitting at the kitchen table where he and Emily had once eaten scrambled eggs in the morning. Life has become a gray routine. He got up at 7 o'clock, made coffee, and sat down to work. Drawings of bridges and pipelines filled the screen, but he didn't see them. He just moved the mouse, drew lines, sent files. He rarely ate frozen pizza or canned goods, which he bought once a week at the store across the street. The neighbor's Paul, Mrs. Grace, tried to speak, but he nodded and walked away without raising his eyes. The phone rang, sometimes his mother, his friends, Linda, but he didn't pick up. The voices were superfluous, like color in his new world. The house has not changed. He didn't put her things away. Her shoes were left by the door, her books on the shelf, her dress in the closet. He couldn't touch them, but he didn't look at them either. He simply lived next to them, as if they were ghosts. At night, he lay on the sofa, looking at the ceiling, and listened to the silence. The dreams came rarely, but they were always the same. Her car was on fire, her voice, her "I'm cramped." He would wake up sweating, clutching the ring that he now carried in his pocket like a talisman of pain. Jake closed in on himself. The world narrowed to the walls of the house, the laptop screen, and the sound of rain outside the window. He walked almost every day that autumn, as if mourning what he had lost. Liz didn't call again, and he was glad. Her words at the funeral became part of his nightmares. He didn't know if he blamed himself, but he felt like a part of him died with Emily. Life flowed gray, monotonous, like the drawings that he drew, and he saw neither an end nor a beginning in it. Jake Carter woke up at 6:45 a.m. to the sound of his alarm clock, the same old one with peeling paint that had been ticking away in his life for nearly 3 decades. He was 48, and every year left a mark on him. His hair turned gray at the temples, his face became covered with wrinkles, and his brown eyes, once alive, now looked tiredly, as if through cloudy glass. He was lying on the sofa in the living room. The bedroom had remained untouched since Emily left, and then left forever. The sofa became his bed, his refuge, his world. The springs creaked under the weight, the upholstery was worn to holes, but he did not change it like many things in this house. The light outside the window was pale, spring, breaking through the same beige curtains that hung here 20 years ago. They were yellowed with age and the edges were frayed, but Jake saw no point in replacing them. The house in the suburbs of Columbus remained almost the same as it was. One story, with white siding that was peeling in places, with a small porch where no one drank lemonade anymore. Inside, Time stood still. Her shoes were still standing by the door. Her books were collecting dust on the shelf. Her dress hung in the closet like a ghost of the past. He didn't touch them, not because he wanted to keep them, but because he couldn't let them go. This was his way of living with memory, with pain, with emptiness. He stood up, feeling his knees ache as years of sedentary work took their toll. The shirt he slept in was wrinkled and smelled of sweat and yesterday's coffee. He went into the bathroom, washed his face with cold water, looking in the mirror at his reflection. The beard he had grown after the funeral was now gray and unkempt, but he trimmed it once a week so as not to look too wild. His eyes were red. He slept poorly, as always, waking up from vague dreams, where the fire, her voice, her laughter flashed. He shaved slowly, habitually, and pulled on jeans and a sweater as gray as his life. The kitchen greeted him with a smell of old wood and slight dampness. The window was leaking, but he didn't fix it. On the table stood a shabby laptop with a Harrison and Sons sticker on it, his connection to the world for the last 20 years. He worked remotely, designed bridges, water pipelines, buildings, sent drawings by email, and received new assignments. He left the office after Emily's death, unable to withstand the looks of his colleagues, their questions, their pity. Tom, his old partner, retired long ago, but the company remained, and Jake stayed with it not out of love for the work, but out of habit. That was all he had. He brewed coffee black, without sugar, in the same best engineer mug, which was faded but not broken. Her mug with the sun had been thrown away long ago. He didn't remember when, but the fragments of that morning still flashed in his memory. He sat down at the table, opened his laptop, and checked his email. There was an email from the new boss, some young upstart named Kevin, with the subject line, "Urgent meeting in Portland." Jake frowned as he read. "Jake, I know you're not a travel fan, but we have a large client in Portland, Oregon. We need to be there in person. Meeting March 25th, tickets and hotel already booked. No refusals accepted. Kevin." Jake closed the laptop, feeling a protest stir within him. Portland. He hadn't left Ohio for 20 years, not since the funeral when he went to Cleveland to pick up her body. His world has narrowed to this house, this city, this routine. He went to the store across the street, went to the bank once a month, sometimes looked at Lake Hawking from the car window, but he didn't take a step further. The trips were for Emily, for her dreams of Italy, of Cape Cod, of freedom. Without her, they lost their meaning. He stood up, walked into the living room, and looked at her books, A Guide to Tuscany, Oceans and Coasts Covered in Dust. She loved traveling, and he stayed here in this house, like an anchor that holds the ship in place. Portland seemed alien to him, distant, unnecessary. But Kevin was persistent. He called twice in a week, wrote, and threatened to fire him if Jake refused. "You are the best engineer, but it's time to leave the cave," he said in the last conversation, and Jake, gritting his teeth, agreed. Not because he wanted to, but because he saw no point in arguing. The day passed in the usual grayness. He was working, drawing plans for a new bridge in Dayton, the same city where Emily met Chris. The name flashed through his head, but he pushed it away, as he had pushed it away for 20 years. When I finished, I sent the files to Kevin, then ate frozen lasagna, heated up in the microwave, and sat on the couch, staring at the switched-off TV. The neighbor's Paul had long since died. Mrs. Grace had moved, no longer knocked on the door or invited me to the barbecue. He was alone, and this loneliness became his second skin. By evening, he packed a bag, an old leather one that he got from his grandfather, the same one that he took to the office. I put a couple of sweaters, jeans, a laptop, and a toothbrush there. Nothing extra. He put her ring in his jacket pocket, blackened, in a plastic bag like a talisman that he had carried with him all these years. He didn't know why, but he felt naked without it. Then he sat down at the table, looking at the ticket that was sent in the mail. Columbus, Portland, departure March 23rd, flight at 8 a.m. 2 days before departure. The night was sleepless. He lay on the sofa, listening to the wind knocking on the windows and thinking about the past. He dreamed of Emily less often, but her face still popped up: freckles, blue eyes, smile. He remembered their quarrel, her "I'm cramped," her suitcase at the door. The guilt that Liz caused at the funeral never went away. It became a part of him, like the wrinkles on his face. If he had not kicked her out, if he had talked, she would not have gone. She would not have gotten into that accident. He knew that this was not the whole truth. She cheated. She wanted to leave, but rationality did not save him from the feeling that he had killed her. The morning of March 23rd was clear. Jake stood up, washed his face, put on his jacket, the same leather one he wore at the funeral, and picked up his bag. He went out onto the porch, closed the door without looking back, and got into the Ford new, bought 5 years ago, but as green as the old one. The road to the airport took half an hour. He drove in silence, looking at the familiar streets of Columbus, houses, shops, the lake in the distance. This was his world, and he was leaving it for the first time in 20 years. The Port Columbus airport was buzzing with people. Jake checked in his bag, and received his boarding pass. The lines, the noise, the smell of coffee from Starbucks, all this was alien, annoying. He sat by the window, looking at the planes, and felt his heart beating faster. The last time he flew with Emily was to Cape Cod in their second year of marriage. She laughed, looking out the porthole, and he held her hand. Now he was alone. The flight lasted 5 hours. Jake sat by the aisle, not looking out the window. Heights scared him, although he wouldn't admit it. A woman with a child was sitting nearby. A boy of about 6 was chatting about dinosaurs, but Jake wasn't listening. He thought about Portland, about the meeting, about how he would return home in 3 days. It was a job, nothing more. The plane landed at 11:30 local time, and he stepped out into Portland Airport, glassy, noisy, crowded with people and signs. The Riverside Inn was centrally located on the Willamette River. Jake took a taxi, silently looking at the city green hills, bridges, rain that began as soon as he got into the car. The room was simple: bed, table, window overlooking the river. He threw the bag on the floor, sat down on a chair, and took the ring out of his pocket. He held it in his hands, feeling the coldness of the metal, and placed it on the table. Tomorrow there was a meeting with some client, a construction company that wanted a new bridge. He didn't get into it. It was his first trip in 20 years, and he wanted it to end. Jake looked out the window at the rain that patterned on the glass and thought that Portland was not his place. His place was in Columbus, in that house, with that pain. But he's here, and there's no choice. He lay down on the bed without undressing and closed his eyes, hearing the river rustling in the distance. Jake Carter woke up in his room at the Riverside Inn in Portland one morning, feeling out of place. The bed was too soft, the sheets smelled of unfamiliar laundry detergent, and the sound of the Willamette River outside was foreign, unlike the familiar patter of rain on the roof of his home in Columbus. He was 48, and those 2 days in Oregon already seemed like an eternity to him. He lay looking at the ceiling, white, without cracks, without history, and felt how loneliness, his faithful companion for 20 years, here, in this new place, became sharper, like a knife that is sharpened after a long oblivion. He stood up, rubbing his neck. His back ached from the long flight and the unusual bed. On the chair lay his jacket, an old leather one, with worn sleeves, and next to it was a bag, from which the corner of a laptop was sticking out. On the table by the window lay her ring, blackened, in a plastic bag, and he automatically took it, squeezed it in his hand, feeling the coldness of the metal. It was a ritual that he himself did not understand. Every day he touched it, as if it could say something, return it, explain it. But it was silent, as it had been silent for 20 years. He put it in his jacket pocket and went to the bathroom. The shower was hot, steam rising to the ceiling, but Jake felt no relief. He stood under the streams, looking at the tiles gray, with small cracks, and thinking about tomorrow's meeting. The client, the construction firm Pacific Bridges, was waiting for him at 10 a.m. in an office across the river. Kevin sent him a plan, bridge drawings, estimates, presentation. Jake had to speak, convince, and be the face of the company. He hated it. For 20 years, he drew lines on the screen, sent files, and remained silent. Now he was pulled here, into this green, rainy city, and he felt naked without his home, without his routine. He got dress jeans, a dark sweater, a jacket, and went down to the hotel lobby. Breakfast was included: scrambled eggs, toast, coffee in paper cups. He took the tray and sat by the window, looking at the river that flowed slowly, like his thoughts. People around him were chatting: a couple of tourists with backpacks, a businessman with a laptop, a family with children, but their voices merged into a hum that he did not want to hear. The food was tasteless, the coffee was bitter, and he left half without finishing it. He needed to occupy the day with something. There was more than a day left before the meeting, and he could not sit in the room. Jake went outside. The rain had stopped, but the air was damp and smelled of grass and asphalt. Portland was green trees lining the streets, hills in the distance, bridges over the river that glistened in the morning light. He walked, without a goal, just to move. Passers-by hurried past: young guys with beards and coffee in their hands, women in coats, an old man with a dog on a leash. The city lived and breathed, but Jake felt like a stranger, like a shadow that slides along the edge of someone else's life. He walked a few blocks until he spotted a sign: River Books and Brew, a bookstore and cafe squeezed between a bakery and an arcade. A wooden door, stained glass windows, the smell of coffee and paper that came from outside. Something about this place seemed cozy and familiar to him, and he pushed the door open, jingling the bell above the entrance. It was warm inside, the light was soft, from old lamps with lampshades. Shelves stretched to the ceiling, filled with books, worn spines, bright covers, old editions bound in leather. Several tables stood near the windows. At one sat a girl with a laptop, at another an old man with a newspaper. Along the far wall was a cafe counter, with a chalkboard with a menu written on it: lattes, espresso, herbal tea, pies. Jake walked inside, feeling the wooden floor creaking under his feet. He didn't know why he came in. He hadn't read a book since Emily left. Her guidebooks were the last things he touched. But here it was quiet, calm, and it drew him like a magnet. He walked up to the counter where the woman stood. Her name was Laura. That's what the badge on her dark green shirt said. She was about 45, maybe a little younger, brown hair, short, with light gray at the temples, a calm face, dim but warm. She was fiddling with the coffee machine, wiping it with a rag, and did not immediately notice him. "Good afternoon," she said, looking up as he came closer. The voice was soft, with a slight hoarseness, like that of a person who talks a lot or sleeps little. "What will you do?" Jake froze for a second, looking at her. She tilted her head slightly, waiting for an answer, and this gesture, simple, almost imperceptible, struck him like lightning. Emily did this. She tilted her head to the left when she listened to him, when she expected him to say something funny or important. He blinked away the vision and cleared his throat. "Just coffee," he said hoarsely. "Black." "Without sugar?" She clarified, and her fingers, thin, with short nails, twirled the ring on her left hand, simple, silver, with a small stone. This gesture, the habit of turning the ring when she was thinking, was the second blow. Emily did the same thing with their wedding ring when she was nervous or just sitting next to him on the porch. Jake felt his heart beat faster and nodded. "Yes, without sugar," he answered, trying not to look at her hands. Laura smiled a light, professional smile and turned to the coffee machine. Jake stood, looking at her back, at the way she moved calmly, confidently, but with some kind of softness that seemed familiar to him. Her hair fell over her face, and she pulled it back, turning her head slightly, and again this tilt was like an echo of the past. He clenched his fists in his pockets, feeling Emily's ring in the plastic, and told himself this was stupid. Coincidence. People tilt their heads, spin rings, nothing special. But something in her clung, pulled, like a thread that caught on a nail and wouldn't let go. She returned with coffee in a white ceramic cup, not the paper one like at the hotel, and placed it in front of him. $3, she said, and her gaze dark green, calm met him. Jake nodded, took out a wallet, old, worn, with faded leather, and handed over a $5. She took the money, counted out the change, and her fingers twirled the ring again, as if it were her tick, her habit. He looked at this, unable to take his eyes off, and felt something strange stir in his chest, not pain, not melancholy, but a vague, alarming recognition. "You're not local, right?" she asked, handing him the change. "The accent is not local." "From Ohio," he answered, taking the coins. "Columbus. Here for work." "We've climbed far," she said with a slight smile, and again that tilt of her head, slightly to the right now, as if she was looking at him. "Welcome to Portland. For how long?" "A couple of days," he said, feeling his voice sound muffled. "Meeting tomorrow, then home." "It's a pity," she answered, and there was no falsehood or coquetry in her tone, just politeness. "Portland is worth seeing. The rain, however, is a hindrance, but in the spring it is beautiful here." He nodded, not knowing what to say. He took the coffee, went to the table by the window, and sat down with his back to her. The cup was warm, steam rose up, but he didn't drink, he just looked at the river behind the glass, at the bridges, at the people walking under umbrellas. Laura returned to her work, wiping the counter, rearranging the cups, and he heard her footsteps, light, almost silent on the wooden floor. But the image of her gestures, the tilt of her head, the ring spinning in her fingers, stuck in my head like a splinter. Jake sat for 10 minutes, maybe more. The coffee cooled, he took a sip bitter, like his thoughts, and stood up. He had to go, prepare for the meeting, but something held him, pulled him to turn around. He looked at her, she was standing by the shelf, laying out books, and again that tilt, as if she was listening to something invisible. He clenched his jaw, banishing the vision of Emily, her face, her movements, and walked toward the door. The bell rang, and he walked out without looking back. The morning in Portland began with a light fog that spread over the Willamette River, blurring the outlines of bridges and hills. Jake Carter woke up in his room at the Riverside Inn with a heavy head and a vague feeling that something had changed. He lay on the bed, looking at the ceiling, and felt the image of Laura, the woman from the bookstore, clinging to his thoughts like a wet leaf to the soul. Her tilt of her head, her habit of twisting the ring on her finger, these little things, so familiar, so impossible, did not let him go all night. He slept poorly, falling into short dreams where he saw Emily, her laughter, her movements, her face that dissolved in the fire. When he woke up, he couldn't help but think that Laura was more than just a coincidence. He stood up, feeling his joints ache. 48 years and 20 years of loneliness had left their mark. Emily's ring lay on the table in a plastic bag, and he took it, squeezing it in his hand as he did every morning. The coldness of the metal was familiar, soothing, but today it seemed alien to him, as if something had shifted within him. He put it in the pocket of his jacket, old leather, with worn sleeves, and went to the bathroom. The shower was hot, steam rising to the ceiling, but it did not wash away the anxiety that was growing in my chest. He shaved, looking in the mirror at his face, gray beard, wrinkles, tired eyes, and thought that he looked like a man who had long ago given up. Maybe it was. The meeting with the client was scheduled for 10 a.m., but thoughts about it seemed distant and unimportant. He got dressed, jeans, dark sweater, jacket, and went down to the lobby, where he took coffee and toast without finishing it. Laura was spinning in my head, her voice, her gestures, her calm smile. He told himself that this was stupidity, that he was clinging to ghosts, but his feet were already carrying him towards the exit, towards that bookstore, towards River Books and Brew. The meeting could wait, he would make it in time, and this was more important, although he did not understand why. The streets of Portland were wet from overnight rain, and the air smelled of grass and river. Jake walked, feeling the wind sneaking under his jacket, and looked at the city green trees, gray buildings, people with umbrellas and coffee in their hands. The store was 3 blocks from the hotel, and he arrived quickly, pushing open the wooden door with stained glass windows. The bell rang, and the warmth inside embraced him like an old friend. The smell of coffee, paper, and wood filled his lungs, and he saw her Laura behind the counter, wearing the same dark green shirt, with a badge that glittered in the lamplight. She laid out the pies on a tray, and her movements were smooth and confident. "Good morning," she said, looking up and smiling a little wider than yesterday, as if she recognized him. "Black coffee again." Jake nodded, feeling his throat go dry. He walked up to the counter, looking at her brown hair, short, with gray, calm face, dark green eyes. She tilted her head, waiting for an answer, and again this gesture was like Emily's when she listened to his stories about work. He clenched his fists in his pockets, pushing away the vision. "Yes, black," he said hoarsely. "No sugar." She turned to the coffee machine, and her fingers thin, with short nails, twirled the ring on her left hand, silver with a stone. Jake looked at this, feeling his heart beat faster. He remembered Emily, how she twirled her ring while sitting on the porch, how she tilted her head when he said something funny. It was impossible, but her every gesture was like an echo, like an imprint that is not erased by time. Laura returned with coffee and placed the cup in front of him. $3, she said, and he held out a fiver, just like yesterday. She counted out the change, and their fingers touched for a second. Her skin was warm, soft. He pulled his hand back as if he'd been burned, and she noticed with a raised eyebrow. "Everything is fine?" she asked, and there was slight concern in her voice. "Yes," he lied, taking the cup. "I was just thinking." "It happens," she said with a smile, and again that tilt of the head. "Sit down if you want. It's quiet here today." He nodded, went to a table by the window, and sat down, looking at the river. The coffee was hot, steam was rising, but he didn't drink, he just held the cup, feeling its warmth. Laura went back to work, wiping down the counter, rearranging books, and he watched her out of the corner of his eye. She was friendly, but not intrusive, and this attracted him like a magnet. He didn't know what to do, leave, forget, or stay and understand why she seemed so familiar to him. A few minutes later, she walked up to his table, carrying a rag and a bottle of cleaning solution. "Do you mind if I clean this up?" she asked, and he shook his head. She started wiping down the nearby table, and he made up his mind. "How long have you been working here?" he asked, trying to sound casual. She looked at him and smiled. 10 years, she said. "I moved here 15 years ago, got a job in a store, and stayed there. I love books, nature, and silence. Portland is a good place for this." 15 years, he repeated, feeling something click in his head. "Where did you move from?" "From afar," she answered evasively, and her fingers twisted the ring again. "Life took such a turn that I had to start over." "What about you? What brought you here?" "Work," he said. "I'm building bridges, meeting with the client." "Interesting," she said, and her voice was sincere. "We have a lot of bridges here. Maybe yours will be built too." He nodded, and they fell silent. She finished cleaning, but did not leave. She stood looking at him, and he noticed a scar on her right hand, thin, white, from wrist to elbow. Emily also had a scar from a burn she had dropped when she dropped a frying pan in their first year of marriage. He looked at him, feeling the blood pounding in his temples, and asked without thinking, "Where does the scar come from?" She looked at the hand, frowned slightly, then shrugged. "It's an old story," she said. "I don't remember exactly. It was a long time ago." He nodded, but everything was boiling inside. The scar, the gestures, the voice, it was too much. He finished his coffee, stood up, said, "Thank you," and left, feeling her gaze in his back. The bell rang, and he found himself outside in the light rain that began again. Jake went to the hotel, but thoughts about Laura did not let go. He had to find out more. After a meeting with a client, it went smoothly, but he barely remembered what he said. He returned to the center. "I went to the bakery next to the store, bought a bun, and asked the saleswoman, a young girl with a nose piercing, about Laura." "Oh, Laura from the bookstore?" she said, chewing gum. "Good aunt. He's been working there for 100 years. They say she appeared in the city about 15 years ago, out of the blue. Without family, without the past. I just took it and settled down." "Without a past?" he asked, feeling his heart pounding. Well, yes, she shrugged. Nobody knows where she comes from. Quiet, lives with a dog. Everyone loves her, but she doesn't talk about herself. He thanked him, left, and moved on. I looked into the gallery opposite and asked the old artist who was painting the river. Laura, the old man scratched his beard. Yes, I remember how she arrived. She rented a house by the river and started working in a store. She said that she loved books, but not a word to herself. Strange, but kind. Jake nodded, feeling the puzzle in his head starting to come together, but not completely. Returning to the room, he opened the laptop, found her on social networks, Laura Miller. Her profile was almost empty. A couple of photos with a dog, a golden retriever, against the backdrop of a forest and a river, and that's all. No friends, no family, no past. He looked at her face calm, slightly tired, and felt anxiety growing inside. That night, he dreamed of Emily. She stood by Lake Michigan, where they were fishing, tilted her head, twisted the ring, and laughed. But her face was blurry, and her voice sounded like an echo. "I'm cramped, Jake." He woke up sweating, his heart pounding, and realized he couldn't leave it like this. Laura was a mystery, and he had to find out the truth, whoever she was. Jake Carter woke up in his Riverside Inn hotel room, determined that he wasn't leaving Portland without sorting things out. The dream of Emily, her blurred face, her voice, her gestures left him with an anxiety that clung to his heart like wet sand. Laura, the woman from the bookstore, was too familiar, too close to the image he had carried within him for 20 years. Her tilt of her head, her habit of twisting the ring, the scar on her hand, these were the threads that pulled him back to the past, to pain, to questions to which he could not find an answer. He had to talk to her, find out who she was, even if it turned out to be just a coincidence. He could no longer remain ignorant. The morning was gray, with light rain tapping on the windows. Jake stood up, feeling his shoulders ache as years of loneliness and sleepless nights took their toll. He washed his face, looking at his face in the mirror, gray beard, wrinkles, tired brown eyes, and thought he looked like a man who had lived in the shadows for too long. He put on jeans, a dark sweater, an old leather jacket, and put Emily's ring blackened in a plastic bag in his pocket. It was his talisman, his anchor, and today he felt he would need it. He went down to the lobby, took coffee, but did not have breakfast. He lost his appetite. The meeting with the client was yesterday, and the flight back to Columbus was tomorrow morning. He had a day left to figure out what to do with Laura. He stepped outside into the rain that was cold on his face and walked to River Books and Brew. The steps were heavy, but decisive. He did not know what he would say, but he knew that he would not leave until he asked. The store greeted him with warmth and the smell of coffee, paper, and old wood. The bell tinkled above the door, and Laura looked up from the counter where she was arranging books. She was wearing a dark blue sweater, her hair brown with gray was slightly disheveled, and her badge glittered in the soft light of the lamps. She smiled, recognizing him, and this tilt of the head slight, almost imperceptible, hit him again, like an echo of the past. "You again," she said with a slight joke in her voice. "Black coffee?" "Yes," he answered hoarsely, approaching the counter. "But, can I see you for a minute? I want to ask you something." She raised an eyebrow, but nodded, placing the book on the shelf. "Of course," she said, and her fingers twisted the ring on her left hand silver with a stone. "What's happened?" Jake clenched his fists in his pockets, feeling Emily's ring pressing through the fabric. "Not here," he said. "Maybe we can have coffee somewhere. I'll treat you. I want to talk." She looked at him calmly, but with slight curiosity in her dark green eyes, and nodded. "Okay," she said. "I have a break in half an hour. There is a cafe across the street. Raindrop. Meet me there?" "Yes," he answered, feeling his throat dry. "Thank you." He left without ordering coffee and went to Raindrop, a small place with wooden tables and floor-to-ceiling windows. The rain got heavier, the drops knocked on the umbrella he had taken from the hotel, and he stood at the entrance, looking at the river in the distance. My heart was pounding, my thoughts were confused. What would he say? How will he ask? He didn't know, but it was too late to retreat. Half an hour later, Laura appeared, wearing a dark blue coat and holding an umbrella. She came in, shaking water from her hair, and smiled at him softly, welcomingly. "Well," she said, sitting down at a table by the window, "what interest do you have in me?" Jake sat across from him and ordered 2 coffees, a black one for himself, a latte for her when she asked. The waitress brought the cups, and he watched the steam rise, gathering his courage. "I don't know where to start," he said finally, looking into her eyes. "You remind me of someone, very much, and I can't let it go." She frowned, but didn't look away. "Someone close?" she asked quietly. "My wife," he answered, and his voice trembled. Her name was Emily. She died a long time ago in an accident. But your gestures, your manner, it's like seeing her again." Laura was silent, looking at him. Her fingers twisted the ring, and he noticed this, feeling how everything inside was compressed. "Tell me," she finally said, and there was softness in her voice, but also wariness, about her. Jake took a sip of his coffee, feeling the bitterness burn his throat, and began to speak. He told everything: how they lived in Columbus, in a small house with white siding, how they made plans for children, how she loved traveling, and he loved his routine. He talked about her betrayal 3 months with Chris, about their quarrel, about how she left, saying, "I'm cramped." He told about the accident, the truck, the fire, her burnt body, identified by the ring that was in his pocket. His voice trembled, but he did not stop, laying out 20 years of pain, loneliness, guilt in front of this woman who sat opposite and listened without interrupting. "I don't leave the house," he finished, looking into his cup. "I've been living where she was for 20 years. I work remotely and don't see people. This is my first trip out of state. And here you are with her gestures, her movements. I don't know what to think." Laura was silent, looking at him. Her face was calm, but her eyes darkened, as if she was remembering something. She put down the latte, clasped her hands on the table, and he noticed the scar on her right arm, white thin, from wrist to elbow. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "What you went through. It's hard. I don't know why I remind you of her, but I also have a story." Jake looked up, feeling his heart beat faster. "Which one?" he asked, and his voice was almost a whisper. She sighed, spun the ring, and began to speak. "I woke up in a hospital in Idaho," she said, looking out the window at the rain. "I don't know how many years ago. I was found on the side of the road, without documents, without memory. The car burned down. They said the accident was severe. I didn't remember who I was or where I was from. I had burns, scars, this one," she showed her hand, "and also on my back. The doctors said that I miraculously survived. But I was empty, no name, no past, nothing." Jake looked at her, feeling a chill run down his spine. He wanted to interrupt, to ask, but remained silent, afraid of frightening her words. "They named me Laura," she continued. "Laura Miller. Just a name that they gave at the hospital because they had to write something down. I spent months there recovering. Then she left and started again. I moved here to Portland because it's quiet and green. I work in a store and live with a dog. I don't have a past, Jake. Only fragments, dreams about fire, about water, about voices that I don't remember. But I don't know who I was before." He listened, and every word she said was like a blow. Accident, fire, memory loss. It was too similar, too close to what he knew about Emily. He remembered her car crumpled, black with soot, identified by its ring and license. He remembered Liz's words at the funeral. "You sent her to that track." What if she didn't die? What if? "Did they find you alone?" he asked, his voice trembling. "No one was looking for you." "No," she said, shrugging. "Nobody came. I was alone. Maybe I had no family, or they thought I was dead. Don't know. I tried to remember, but there was nothing. Only emptiness." Jake looked at her, feeling the world rock beneath his feet. He took the package with Emily's ring out of his pocket and put it on the table without opening it. "It's hers," he said quietly. "What's left?" Laura looked at the package, but did not touch it. Her fingers twirled her ring, and she looked away. "I'm sorry," she repeated. "I don't know what to say. Maybe it's just a coincidence. People are similar to each other. Maybe, he said, but he didn't believe it. The scar, the gestures, the accident, it was more than an accident. He wanted to scream, demanding the truth, but he saw in her eyes the emptiness she was talking about. She didn't know, or she didn't remember. They finished their coffee in silence. Laura stood up, straightening her coat. "I have to go," she said. "Thanks for the coffee, and for your story. If you want to talk more, I'm at the store." He nodded as he watched her leave. The rain beat on the windows, and her silhouette dissolved into grayness. Jake remained seated, clutching the bag with the ring, feeling the questions bursting out. Who is she? Emily? Laura? Or no one? He didn't know, but now he couldn't leave without finding out. Jake Carter returned to his room at the Riverside Inn after his conversation with Laura, feeling like the world around him was falling apart at the seams. Her words about the accident, about Idaho, about memory loss played in his head like a broken record that he couldn't turn off. He sat on a chair by the window, looking out at the Willamette River, which flowed slowly as his thoughts, and clutched Emily's ring in his hand, blackened in a plastic bag. The rain pattered on the glass, and each sound was like a blow, driving one thought into him. What if she was Emily? It was impossible, crazy, but her gestures, scar, history, everything fit into a puzzle that he was afraid to complete. He didn't sleep that night. Police said the body was burned and that he was identified by his ring and the remains of his license. He saw the coffin closed and heard Liz's words at the funeral. "You killed her." For 20 years he lived with this truth, with this guilt, but now Laura alive, with her head tilt and habit of twisting the ring, questioned everything. He should have known, not for himself, but for her, the Emily he loved, the one he lost. That morning he called Kevin, his boss, and asked for a delay in returning to Columbus. "It's personal," he said hoarsely, and Kevin, although he grumbled, agreed. Jake found a lab in Portland online that did DNA tests and made an appointment. Then he went to River Books and Brew, feeling his heart pounding as if he were going to execution. The bell tinkled and Laura looked up from the counter where she was wiping down the coffee machine. She was wearing a dark green shirt. Her hair was slightly disheveled, and she smiled softly, but with a slight wariness. "Here you are again," she said, and her fingers twisted the ring on her left hand. "Coffee?" "No," he answered, coming closer. "I want to suggest something. This sounds weird, but listen." She frowned but nodded, putting the rag down. "Speak," she said, and her voice was calm, but anxiety flashed in her eyes. Jake took a deep breath, feeling the words get stuck in his throat. "I want to do a DNA test," he finally said. "You and me. To find out if you're mine, if you're Emily." Laura froze, looking at him. Her face was motionless, but her fingers twisted the ring again faster, nervously. "Are you serious?" she asked quietly. "Do you think I'm your wife? After everything I've told you?" "I don't know what to think," he said, and his voice trembled. "But your gestures, the scar, the accident, these are too many coincidences. I can't leave without finding out. If it's not you, I'll leave and never come back. But if this is you..." He fell silent, unable to find words. Laura looked at him, and there was something in her dark green eyes, not fear, not anger, but vague, heavy thought. She sighed, looking away to the window where the rain was drawing patterns on the glass. "This is crazy," she said finally. "I don't remember anything that happened before the hospital. But if you're so sure, I agree. Just don't expect me to believe it." "Thank you," he squeezed out, feeling how everything inside was shrinking. "I'll organize everything." They agreed to meet in an hour at the laboratory, a small clinic in downtown Portland with white walls and the smell of antiseptic. Jake came first, paid for the test, a rapid analysis. They promised the result in 2 weeks. Laura appeared in a coat with an umbrella and silently gave a sample, a swab from the mouth, as simple as an injection. He did the same, feeling the nurse looking at them with mild curiosity. Laura didn't say a word, just nodded goodbye to him and left, leaving him with his heart pounding. For 2 weeks he lived in a fog. I stayed in Portland, extended my hotel room, and waited, wandering around the city along the river, through the parks, in the rain that did not stop. He didn't go to the bookstore, afraid to meet her gaze, but every day he thought about her scar, about her words, about her life that she built without him. He called the laboratory, checked his email, and counted the hours. At night, he dreamed of Emily, her laughter, her face, her car on fire, and he woke up sweating, clutching the ring in his hand. The result came in the morning, 2 weeks later, in an envelope that was shaking in his hands. He opened it in his room, sitting on a chair by the window, and read, DNA match 99.9%. Laura Miller is Emily Carter. The paper fell from his hands, and he stared into space, feeling like the world was collapsing. She was Emily. Hi, Emily. Alive. But how? A burned body was found in the car, identified by the ring and license. He buried her, saw the coffin, and lived with this truth for 20 years. How could this be? He went to her that same day with an envelope and old photos that he took from home before the trip, their wedding, Cape Cod, a picnic by the lake. She lived in a small house by the river with a green lawn and a dog that barked at the porch. He knocked and Laura answered, wearing jeans and a sweater, with surprise in her eyes. Did something happen? She asked, and her fingers twisted the ring. Yes, he said, entering as she let him in. The result has arrived. You are Emily. She froze, looking at him, then slowly sat down on the sofa, clasping her hands. Are you sure? She asked quietly. He handed her the envelope, and she read it without looking up. Then she looked at him, and there was a mixture of disbelief and fear in her face. It's impossible, she said. I don't remember you. I don't remember anything. Jake took out a photo and put it on the table, their wedding, she in a white dress with daisies, he in a black suit, smiling. Another thing, she's on the beach, with a mug, laughing. Also, by the lake, with a fishing rod, he bows his head. It's you, he said, his voice trembling. Emily, my wife. She took the photo and looked at it, but her face remained blank. She twirled the ring and shook her head. I don't know these people, she said quietly. It's not me. I have a different life, Jake. I'm Laura. I have an adopted son, friends, and work. I'm not who you think I am. But the test. He began, feeling rage and despair rushing out. You are Emily. How can you not remember? We lived together, loved each other, and then they found a body in the car. I buried you. How is this possible? She looked at him, and her eyes were wet but firm. I don't know, she said. Maybe there was another woman there. Maybe they pulled me out before everything burned. I don't remember, Jake. I woke up in the hospital, and all that was before was emptiness. I'm not your Emily. I'm Laura. He stood up, feeling his legs shaking. He didn't understand. The body in the car, the ring, the license, everything pointed to her death. But she sat in front of him, alive, real, with her gestures, her scar, her DNA. He wanted to scream, demand answers, but he saw the truth in her eyes. She didn't know him. She was Emily, but not his Emily. What should I do? He asked, his voice breaking. I lived with this for 20 years, and now you are here. Move on with your life, she said quietly. I have my own life. I can't be what you want. I'm sorry. He nodded, took the photo and envelope, and left without saying another word. The rain was pouring, the dog was barking in the distance, and he stood by the river, looking at the water, not understanding how this could be. Body in the car, her ring, her death, and now she is alive, but alien. He clenched his fists, feeling the ring in his pocket burn, and walked towards the hotel, lost as never before. The rain poured down outside the window, pattering on the glass, and the Willamette River flowed like a gray ribbon, reflecting the clouds. He sat down on a chair, throwing his jacket on the bed, and took Emily's ring from his pocket, blackened, in a plastic bag. His hand shook as he looked at it, feeling the coldness of the metal through the plastic. For 20 years he carried it as a memory, as guilt, as proof of her death. And now she was alive, 10 minutes away, in a house by the river, with a dog and a life where there was no room for him. Her words, I'm not your Emily, I have my own life, sounded in my head like a sentence. The DNA test, her gestures, her scar, everything screamed that she was his wife, But her eyes, her voice, her firmness said the opposite. She didn't remember him. I didn't remember their house in Columbus, their wedding, their trips, their fights. She was Laura Miller, a woman with an adopted son, friends, a job at a bookstore, and she didn't want to be Emily Carter. Jake didn't know how to take it. He buried her, saw the coffin, lived with her death for 20 years, and now she stood in front of him, alive, but alien. And he didn't understand how this was possible. The body in the car, the ring, the license, everything that the police gave him then was real. But she was real too. He stood up, walked to the window, and pressed his forehead against the cold glass. The rain made patterns, and he thought about what to do. He could have stayed, fought, demanded answers from her, from the doctors, from the police who had closed the case many years ago. He could show her more videos, letters, things he kept in the house, and try to jog her memory. But her face, calm, firm, with that emptiness in her eyes, stopped him. She didn't want this. She chose her life, and he had no right to ruin it, even if it killed him. Jake returned to the table and took out a notebook from his bag, an old one with yellowed pages that he had taken with him for no particular purpose, and a pen. He decided to write her a letter, not to convince, not to return, but to let go. He sat down, feeling his heart pounding, and began to write, slowly, squeezing out each word like blood. Laura. I don't know what to call you, Laura or Emily. To me, you will always be Emily, my Emily, even if you don't remember it. The DNA test showed that you are her, and I can't deny it, although I don't understand how it's possible. I lived for 20 years thinking that you died in that accident. I saw your car burnt out, heard the police talking about the body, and wore your ring as a memory. I buried you, Laura, and all this time you were alive. You don't remember me, and I see that you don't want to remember. You have your own life, a son, friends, this city that has become your home. I can't blame you. You built something new, but I remained in the past, in our house, with your things, with your shadow. I thought that if I found you, everything would change, that I would get you back. But you are not mine, and maybe you never were even when you cheated on me, when you left. I leave you this letter and photo. This is us, our wedding, Cape Cod, the lake where we fished. Maybe you'll look and feel something, maybe you won't. It's your right. I won't look for you anymore. You're my Emily, but I'm not your Jake. Live your life, Laura. Be as happy as you can. Goodbye. Jake. He reread the letter, feeling tears burning in his eyes, but did not let them fall. I took out old photos from my bag, their wedding, she in a white dress with daisies, he in a black suit. Cape Cod, she with a mug on the beach. Lake, she is with a fishing rod, tilts her head. He put them in an envelope along with a letter, sealed it, and wrote her name, Laura Miller. Then he put on his jacket, took an umbrella, and went to her house. The rain poured down, the wind drove the drops across his face, but he did not notice. Her house was by the river, small, with a green lawn and a porch where a dog toy lay. He knocked, and she answered, wearing jeans and a sweater, with surprise in her eyes. Jake, she said, and her fingers twirled the ring on her left hand. Anything else? The last one, he answered hoarsely, holding out the envelope. This is for you. Read it whenever you want. I am leaving tomorrow. She took the envelope, looked at it, and a shadow flashed in her dark green eyes. Not recognition, not pain, but something vague, heavy. For what? She asked quietly. To let go, he said. You don't have to do anything. Just know that you are my Emily, even if I'm nobody to you. She nodded, squeezed the envelope in her hands, and he saw the scar on her hand, white, thin, like the thread that connected them through the years. Thank you, she said finally, and I'm sorry that I'm not who you want me to be. You are the one, he answered, smiling bitterly, just not mine. He turned and left without looking back. The rain beat on the umbrella, the dog barked in the distance, and he felt like something inside was breaking the last thread that held him in the past. He returned to the hotel, packed his bag, lay down on the bed, and looked at the ceiling until night fell over the city. The morning was clear for the first time in a week. Jake boarded the flight to Columbus, looking out the window at the green hills of Portland that disappeared under his wing. He didn't know what he was feeling: relief, emptiness, pain. everything mixed up into a gray lump that lay in my chest. The flight passed in silence. He did not eat, did not speak, just looked at the clouds, clutching the ring in his pocket. The house in Columbus greeted him with silence. He entered, threw his bag at the door, walked into the living room, where everything was as it was 20 years ago, her shoes at the entrance, her books on the shelf, her dress in the closet. He pulled out an old video player and a cassette taped their wedding, filmed on his brother's shaky camera. I inserted it, turned on the TV, and the screen came to life. Emily was there young, with daisies in her hair, in a white dress that fluttered in the wind. She laughed, tilted her head, twirled the ring on her finger, looking at him young, in a black suit, with a smile that had long disappeared. They danced, ate cake, hugged to the music that crackled in the old speakers. Jake watched, feeling tears running down his cheeks, and did not wipe them away. This was his Emily, the one that remained on film, in his memory, in his heart. He squeezed the ring in his hand, and for the first time in 20 years, he felt like he was letting go not of her, but of himself. At the same moment, in Portland, Laura Miller was sitting on the porch of her house by the river. The rain had stopped, and the sun was breaking through the clouds, illuminating the water. Her dog, a golden retriever named Max, lay nearby with his head in her lap. Laura stroked her, feeling the soft fur under her fingers, and looked at the lake in the distance, calm, deep, like her thoughts. On the table in front of her lay an envelope, opened, with a letter and a photo. She read it in the morning, slowly, reading every word. The photos, the wedding, the beach, the lake looked at her like someone else's memories, like stills from a movie she hadn't seen. She didn't recognize herself in that girl with the daisies. She didn't feel anything except a vague longing not for the past, but for something she couldn't understand. Her fingers twirled the ring on her hand, a silver one with a stone that she had worn for years, and she thought. Her son, a foster boy named Liam, was at school. Her friends were waiting for her at the bookstore. Her life was here, in this house, with this dog, in this city. She didn't know who she was before Idaho, before the hospital, before amnesia, but she knew who she was now. Jake's letter sat before her like a bridge to something she didn't want. She wasn't Emily. She was Laura. She stood up, took Max by the collar, and walked towards the water, feeling the wind touch her hair. The lake sparkled, and she looked at it thoughtfully, not knowing what she was thinking about. The letter remained on the table, the photo moved in the wind, but she did not turn around. Her life was ahead, and her past was somewhere out there, beyond the horizon, with a person she did not remember. Jake turned off the TV when the tape ended. Silence covered the house, and he sat, looking into the darkness of the screen, with the ring in his hand. She was alive, but not with him. And maybe that was right. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.